Okay, what about evolution part two? I don't know if my doggy will be better this time around. On page 6 and 7, Dr. Cordero addresses the question, what's the difference between micro and macro evolution? A distinction that we still hear made often. Can I affirm some parts of evolution, and that's, for some Christians, that would be micro, without affirming all parts, which would be macro? I like her answer at the top of 7. The problem with accepting small-scale evolution and rejecting large-scale evolution is that the mechanisms that result in antibiotic-resistant bacteria, the work that she'd been referring to earlier, are exactly the same mechanisms that lead to the large-scale changes we see over very long periods of time. And of course, that's the issue here, the long periods of time, like the origin of mammals. There's no difference in the processes except the amount of time considered. If given enough time, small genetic changes accumulate, resulting in the incredible diversity we see on Earth. So it does require vast amounts of time. And certainly we can say this is one of the reasons that a young Earth approach has no room for evolution, because the amount of time required for the kind of evolutionary changes and diversity that we see on our planet would require an immense scale of time. Apparently we've had that. All the indications are, we just think about what we learned on Tuesday from our cosmologist friend. Hey, stop it. Dr. Schmelzenbach. Coco. Hush. Now, you're being a bad girl. A doggy just went by. Now you gotta quit that. You be good. Maybe you could evolve into a quieter animal. Do we have enough time for that? Probably not. Not enough time. Okay. I'll come back to that some more in a minute here. So she talks more about this issue of time. Oh, I was going to say about Dr. Schmelzenbach. The fact, and it is a fact, that we can look back in time by directing our telescopes into the sky or into what's above us and beyond us, and see millions of years into the past. I talked a little bit with Dr. Schmelzenbach about this after class, and we acknowledged that there are people, many of whom, if not most of whom, would be Christians, who believe in a young Earth, and most of them then also a young universe. There are some people that can combine these in a very old universe with a very young Earth. That's quite a trick. It's usually based on, I think we may have talked about this early on, the so-called gap theory, which is a horrible misreading of Scripture. But in any case, the fact that we can observe light coming to us from billions of years in the past, which is incredible, demonstrates that we live in a very old universe, unless, of course, God created the universe to look old, but it's really quite young. In other words, kind of created light sort of on the way, or I'm not even going to try to explain it, because it's a horrible way to think about God, that God would create a world, a universe, that looked old but isn't. This kind of flies in the face of the kinds of things I said a moment ago about, certainly about what I believe about God regarding giving us space and opportunity and the minds to explore the world in which we live. And if we cannot actually trust the observations we make, but instead are going to base our understanding of the world on an assumption that the Bible's a science textbook and that we can do the genealogical mathematics to figure out how young the world is, how old it is. We've got a strange view of God here. God telling us it's really young, even though it looks really, really old. I don't believe in a God like that. I would discourage you from it as well. But we have room to make our choices, don't we? A little bit later, on page 13, I do want to talk about this. I think it's really important. She's been talking about mutations and the random element in genetic mutation. People get a little worried about the term random. Middle of page 13, genetic mutations are random. When discussing evolution, mutation refers to changes in the genetic code, the DNA. She then talks about the 4 molecules within DNA, and it gets beyond my abilities really fast. The human genome is made up of 3.2 billion bases of DNA, but the capacity for when cells replicate, there can be errors or mutations as the DNA is copied. That actually there are mutations that inevitably occur in passing on or copying DNA, which is interesting. Mutations can be helpful to an individual, he tells us on 15, sometimes not. Instead of explaining each of these additional mechanisms in detail, Cordero says about the middle of 15, I've come to realize that for most Christians, the resistance to randomness has much more to do with the notion of purposeless change than it does a desire to understand the biology. A lot of this will depend on how we, we'll say, decide to think about God and life, and whether or not accidents or contingencies, or it happened this way but it could have happened a different way, whether we're comfortable with that kind of a world. For some, God pretty much micromanages the world. Everything that happens according to a plan or God's almost blueprint. And, so we say things like God is in control. I'm always a little nervous about that phrase. Because again, it appears to me, tell me if I'm wrong, that if God is in control, it's weird that God seems quite willing to allow us a great deal of agency in the world, choices that confront us, the accidents that happen. Like, if somebody's in an automobile accident, perish the thought. But do we just assume that this was God's plan? Well, gee whiz, human beings are the ones who invented automobiles. We like them for they get us around quickly and conveniently from point A to point B. Human beings have chosen to pursue this kind of technology. You and I didn't choose, other people did it, but then we get to choose whether or not to avail ourselves of that technology. Obviously, the choice seems often kind of made for us. We live in a culture where, we've got freeways and all that. So, yeah, our freedom isn't absolute, but still, we're the ones that decide to get in behind a wheel and get into this little machine and go many miles an hour on a freeway with other people. Accidents will happen. That's kind of the nature of the world in which we live, particularly as you think about the agency not only of human beings, but all kinds of creatures in the world, including my dog, who a little while ago was behaving quite badly. It's not like I think she was making those choices, but at least not like a human does. But nonetheless, now she's She's lying down being quiet and good because she's a good girl. But as a doggy, she exercises a measure of agency in the world. She affected my videos a little while ago. We live in a world of creaturely interdependence where all kinds of contingencies. It could have gone this way, it went that way. This happened and not that. I made this choice. That person made that choice and not that one, and it affected me in this way. I think it makes for a healthy theology to suggest that God isn't micromanaging this. God is present and at work in all of this. God works to bring about good in every situation, to weave us into more and more like Christ-like human beings. But God isn't pulling all the strings. That would be a kind of in my opinion, a control freak God, a power hungry God. And if there's anything that we've learned through the revelation given to us in Jesus, God is not power hungry. God empties God's self in love and great compassion for all creatures, including you and me. Well, she's got some great stuff here on DNA. It sometimes gets beyond my capacity, but it's a good read, right? It's a good read. At this point, top of 23, many Christians cringe and resist the idea that humans evolved in the same way as other species on Earth. I think that we should get over that. The Old Testament repeatedly emphasizes that we are creatures. We are creatures of dust. All creatures are dust, including humans. And in the Old Testament, dust is a metaphorical term. Obviously, I'm not literally, falling apart as dirt particles, but dust as a term that says we are finite and frail and temporary creatures, and we resist that. Human beings have a great history for resisting that. Evolutionary theory does us a great favor of underscoring that we are such creatures as this. Feeble, frail, historical, limited, dust. All flesh is grass. Grass is here today, gone tomorrow. I'll pause here. We'll do one more.